Mid-May 1943, shift change. 2 delay switches wrapped in oiled cloth issued under clearance. My log shows 1 vial end crushed, 1 crimp seated, then a failure. Wet steam air on the tube. The inspection note was sealed that night. Early March 1943, Hertfordshire, England. The war had become a problem of movement. German armies in the east were fed by rail. Coal, steel, spare parts, fuel and men rode timetables. Britain could not reach every yard with bombers, so it tried to reach them with people. Inside a guarded SOE training site, tables held small objects that looked harmless when separated. Detonators in waxed paper, plastic explosive in blocks, wire, clips and crimpers, and a device the size and shape of a writing pencil built for a job that had no place for clockwork. It was issued a switch number, 10 delay. Its operators often called it a timing pencil. Its duty was simple: provide a silent portable delay between planting a charge and firing it. Its measurable constraint was time. Typical issues ranged from about 10 minutes to about 24 hours. Accuracy depended on conditions. Cold could stretch a long delay. Heat could shorten it. A 12-hour setting could drift by around an hour. A short setting could drift by minutes. It was reliable in function, not in perfect scheduling. Inside the tube sat a striker held under spring tension. A thin metal wire restrained the striker. At one end sat a percussion cap and detonator train. At the other end sat a sealed glass vial. The vial held a corrosive liquid. To start the timer, the operator crushed the end of the tube to break the vial. The liquid seeped onto the restraining wire. And over time it weakened the metal. When the wire finally failed, the spring drove the striker into the cap. The cap fired. The detonator followed. There was no ticking while it worked. No winding key. No hands moving over a dial. Only chemistry doing time in darkness. In early 1943, that silence mattered. German rail police listened for the wrong noises. Guard patrols were built around routine. A saboteur had minutes on a ballast shoulder, or seconds inside a depot storeroom. If the timer announced itself, the whole operation collapsed. The device existed because of a stubborn wartime problem. Sabotage teams needed to leave. They needed distance for survival. They needed distance for deniability. They also needed something that could be taught quickly. A resistance group could not be turned into a watchmaking shop. SOE workshops had tried different solutions. Simple fuses burned too fast and could be seen. Clockwork delays were accurate, but they were bulky, and the sound of a spring train could betray a man in a quiet shed. Some clockwork units also disliked dirt and rough handling. Field reports returned the same idea in different handwriting. Too complicated under pressure. The chemical delay switch was the compromise, not precise like a chronometer, but consistent enough to be useful, small enough to hide in a pocket, cheap enough to issue in quantity, silent enough to defeat a listening guard. SOE training sheets circulated with the device. Their language stayed restrained. They listed strengths: small, simple, quick to start, hard to detect by ear. They also listed what the switch would not promise: exact time. Delays were supplied in fixed ranges. Each tin held several, all of the same nominal delay, so an operator could plan without mixing types in the dark. The sheets also carried an instruction that sounded minor, but was treated as doctrine in serious operations. If the target mattered, use 2, not 2 from the same tin if it could be avoided, 2 from different batches. If one switch failed, the other might not. If both worked, the earlier firing would decide the blast time. The method traded some predictability for a large increase in certainty of function. That advice was not superstition. It was an admission of real conditions. The corrosive liquid could behave differently in heat and cold. A seal could be bruised in transport. A glass vial could crack in the wrong way. Teams carried correction charts but no thermometers. In the field, temperature was guessed from frost, from breath, from the feel of a bicycle handle at night. In one corner of the training room, a tray held switches that had been deliberately abused, dropped from waist height onto wood, pressed too hard in a vise, left overnight near a window where condensation formed. They were not displayed as curiosities. They were shown as warnings. One switch had fired early during a bench test. The note blamed heat from a small stove. Another had not fired at all. When it was opened, the vial had leaked and left crystals, as if the chemistry had moved where it was not meant to go. A third had fired late after being chilled. The same lesson appeared again and again. Time here was not a dial, it was a reaction. On paper this was manageable. The chart offered corrections. It warned that cold could add hours. It warned that heat could subtract them. But charts cannot measure the wind inside a freight shed. They cannot predict the warmth of a man's pocket. They cannot account for a vial crushed imperfectly. SOE did not hide these limits. It tried to plan around them. Targets were chosen that could absorb uncertainty. If a charge might fire between midnight and dawn, a yard was safer than a street corner. If a delay might drift, the escape route had to survive that drift. In the same lectures, students were also told about other delay methods. Some relied on stressed metal slowly creeping until it snapped. Those alternatives mattered in certain environments, especially where moisture could interfere with corrosion. Their existence shows how urgently SOE searched for time that did not depend on a ticking spring. In practice, the chemical pencil remained common because most sabotage still happened in dirty, dry places, where silence was worth the uncertainty. That March, parcels were being prepared for drops to northern France. Inside were radio crystals, cipher pads, and medical dressings. There were also explosive stores, because London had asked for a specific kind of disruption. Not heroic raids, interruptions that multiplied. Rail yards were the chosen point. The Germans could rebuild track quickly, but a damaged turnout at the right hour spread delay across multiple lines. A burned signal cable forced trains to stop and wait. A locomotive disabled in the wrong place turned an entire yard into a knot. The plan depended on deniability. And a blast with an obvious fuse line suggested a nearby hand. A blast hours later, after the saboteur had vanished into safe houses, made German security chase the wrong shadows. The chemical delay switch was built for that gap. The constraint was weight. Aircraft that carried supplies across the channel had strict limits. Every ounce added to one parcel took space from another. Every extra instruction increased the chance of a mistake. Training had to compress complex effects into simple actions. An instructor demonstrated the sequence without rhetoric. Crush the end to break the vial. Seat the switch so it cannot move. Keep the striker path clear. Crimp properly. Use a booster if required. If the target is critical, set 2. If the air is cold, expect longer. If the air is hot, expect shorter. Leave no fragments of packaging. But do not abandon spares where they can be found. He also emphasized a habit that never looked dramatic on paper. Hands should be clean, not for neatness, but because oil and grit could enter a crimp. A loose crimp was more dangerous than an enemy patrol. It could produce a half fire that warned guards without destroying the target. It could also leave evidence that helped the Germans learn. A railway worker from northern France attended the course. He had worked yards since he was a teenager. He knew what stopped trains and what the Germans repaired fastest. He asked one practical question: how accurate is it? The instructor did not offer certainty. He pointed to the chart. A short delay could be off by minutes. A long delay could drift by an hour or more. He said the switch was reliable in function, not in clocks. As the railway worker understood what that meant. He did not need the blast to happen at 2:17. He needed it to happen when he was not there. Before men left England, SOE training included a final exercise. A mock target was built in a shed. A plate was bolted down like a points cover. Students had to set a charge while a man with a whistle walked past at irregular intervals. The whistle stood in for a guard's boots. Each student had to stop when the sound neared, then resume without losing steps. The lesson was physical. Fear causes hands to hurry. Hurry makes mistakes. Mistakes leave devices unexploded for the enemy to find. 2 weeks later, in late March 1943, a moonless night settled over a rail district in occupied northern France. German freight moved toward Belgium and the Ruhr. Some also moved east, rerouted across Europe toward the front where the Soviets fought. The German system survived by keeping wagons rolling. A yard that lost its rhythm slowed everything that depended on it. A local resistance cell had one window. A patrol passed a certain gate every 18 minutes. A watchman smoked in a shed and looked away when he lit a match. These habits had been observed over weeks, because sabotage without observation was only guesswork. The chosen target was a set of points at a junction, a place where multiple lines fed into a main route. Explosives on open track could be replaced with rails taken from sidings. Explosives under the points mechanism, placed where oil and grit hid hands, created a repair that needed skilled men and daylight. The railway worker did not enter as a commando. He entered as what he was, a worker with tools, A pouch under his coat held 2 delay switches, a detonator train, and a small block of plastic explosive. A wrench in his pocket provided an ordinary reason to be there. Inside the yard, the air was cold. Frost sat in the shadows. That cold mattered. If corrosion slowed, the delay could stretch into dawn. He chose a shorter nominal delay than London's paper preference. He had been taught to think in constraints, not ideals. The escape route was a bicycle ride and a canal crossing. It needed time to clear the district, but it could not afford daylight checkpoints. He used 2 switches, not because he liked waste, but because failure here meant discovery of the method. A recovered device would teach German security what to look for. It would also teach them how to imitate. He crushed the first vial end. Had no sound beyond the small give of metal. He crushed the second. Then he seated both into the charge as trained, keeping them aligned so either could fire the same train. He kept his hand slow. A rushed crimp slipped. A slipped crimp turned a clever tool into a non-functioning tool. He worked under a low lamp that made the ballast shine. The lamp was meant to deter thieves. That night it lit the hands of a saboteur. A guard's boot scraped in the distance. He stopped, not because he panicked, but because he respected routine. He waited for the scrape to pass. Then he finished the seating, pressed the charge into a hollow, and replaced grease-stained cover plates. No paper was left, no tin, no wrapper, only disturbed grit that looked like normal maintenance. By 1:30 he was out of the yard. By 2 he was in a back room above a bakery. Though by 3 o'clock he was asleep in his clothes, because the safest man is the man who looks ordinary at dawn. The explosion did not arrive at a predicted minute. It arrived when chemistry decided it was time. German railway police reports from occupied northern France recorded a blast under Point's gear that appeared without warning. They noted no obvious fuse remnants. They noted no clockwork parts. They described damage consistent with a charge placed low and close. They suspected a delayed initiation, but could not state a mechanism. That uncertainty was the purpose. For hours the junction was shut. Crews tried to move wagons by hand. A replacement mechanism had to come from another district. Signals backed up. Locomotives idled, burning coal. Schedules collapsed into improvisation. The effect was not dramatic in popular dramatizations. And no fireball seen from miles away. No cheering crowd, just trains that did not arrive on time, and cargo that reached its destination late, if it reached it at all. In London, planners wanted numbers, how many wagons delayed, how many engines held, how many tons diverted. Cells could not provide clean figures, they could only provide signs. Repair crews working through the next evening, extra sentries, searches of workers' bags, interrogations that made men disappear. Those consequences tightened the problem. Success made the yard harder to enter next time. Failure made it impossible. In April 1943, another cell tried the same method on a smaller target, a depot store. They planted an incendiary charge meant to burn records and spares. It used the same chemical delay principle. The charge should have fired before sunrise. It did not. And when the building was searched later for unrelated reasons, the device was found intact behind crates. The vial end showed staining, as if corrosive liquid had leaked and diluted. The restraining wire had not failed. The striker sat restrained, silent and patient. This was the reality instructors had warned about. The switch was simple, but it lived in a world that abused seals and glass. A drop case could land hard, a hand could crush too gently. A worker could seat it against a rough edge and bruise the tube. German security took the recovered parts away. They did not publish an explanation. But their procedures shifted. Workshops were ordered to watch for small brass tubes. Waste bins were searched. Toolkits were inspected. Workers were forced to empty pockets at gates. The failure produced quiet arguments inside the networks. Some blamed discipline, some blamed equipment shit, some blamed London for issuing delays unsuitable for cold air. The answer from headquarters remained unsentimental. The switch could not be made perfect. It had to be treated as a component, not as a promise. Headquarters also applied pressure of its own. Stores were finite. Aircraft space was finite. The Use 2 doctrine doubled consumption. Quartermasters complained about wastage. Operational staff answered with the same logic used in aviation. Redundancy was not waste when failure meant capture, and capture meant the enemy learning the method. In May 1943, a new request came from the northern circuits. Guarding had tightened at Point's gear. But a nearby steam-driven pump house still ran with casual habits. It served a small factory that repaired rolling stock. The factory was not glamorous. It was one of the places that kept the rail system alive. If the pump house failed, repairs slowed. If repairs slowed, yard capacity fell even when track was intact. The pump house was also easier to enter because it smelled of oil and wet coal, and workers moved in and out without formal checks. A team could hide among them. That was the logic of system sabotage. Not one great blow, but many small losses that forced the enemy to pay attention everywhere. The constraint now was moisture. Steam plants are damp. Condensation forms on pipes. A chemical delay switch did not like water. If moisture entered, it could weaken corrosion or spread it and change timing. SOE instructions offered a workaround. Wrap the device, keep the vial end protected until the last moment, seat it where drips will not reach it. And if the environment is too wet, use an alternative delay method. Field teams did not always have a choice. Sometimes they only had what had been dropped. In mid-May 1943, a team entered the pump house during a shift change. There was a German guard outside, but the guard was there to prevent theft, not to understand boilers. Inside, arguments and hammer blows created ordinary noise. Ordinary noise covered covert work. The charge was carried in a canvas roll. The delay switches were wrapped in oiled cloth. The operator chose a nominal delay that allowed a wide escape margin. Not because the chart felt comforting, but because roads, fences, and bad luck consumed time. The charge was placed behind a metal panel where heat would not cook it too early, and where water would not drip. The vial ends were crushed gently but firmly. Yet the tubes were checked by a touch for dents. Then the panel was closed, and his surface was wiped with a dirty rag, adding fingerprints that belonged to everyone who worked there. The team did not run. They left one by one. They used different streets. They separated so one arrest would not expose all. The blast came during the early morning lull, not at the exact minute a planner would have preferred, but inside the expected band. The pump house filled with smoke and dust. The boiler did not explode into a spectacular cloud, but the forced shutdown crippled the small factory for days. Parts deliveries slowed. Repair schedules slipped. The yard's recovery from earlier disruption became harder. German investigators wrote a different kind of report this time. It did not focus it on a crater. It focused on access. It listed keys. And it listed shift changes. It listed moments when foremen stepped outside. It showed, unintentionally, how industrial routine creates openings. The Germans responded by tightening control. They added passes. They added locks. They posted guards inside. These measures cost men. Those men were no longer available elsewhere. They were also not skilled boiler fitters. Guarding a pump house did not repair a pump house. This was the quiet peak of the story. A small chemical device forced a large security apparatus to spend itself, not in one decisive moment, but in repeated, exhausting vigilance. In late 1943, German authorities in France increased guard rotations at critical points. They installed more locks. They created passes for workers. They tried to turn routine into control, yet routine cannot be eliminated from an industrial system. The rail yards must still function. Workers must still touch mechanisms, grease must still be applied, and access never fully disappeared. By late 1943, a circuit message described a new constraint. Curfews were tightening, checkpoints were closer, bicycles were being confiscated at night, escape time had shrunk. The circuits asked for fast delays because anything too long risked daylight arrests. Headquarters replied in the same dry language. Short delays existed. They were less forgiving. They left little time for mistakes, but they matched the new reality. Weeks later, in early winter, a team placed a charge near a locomotive servicing pit. The goal was not to kill crews. It was to put the engine out of service. A damaged locomotive could take weeks to replace, especially when spare parts were already strained. They selected a delay that should allow them to clear the district, then crush the vial. The corrosion began, the restraining wire started to weaken. The blast came earlier than planned. A temperature shift during the night had warmed the air and chemical action accelerated. The team had barely reached a safe address when windows shook and dogs barked. German patrols flooded the streets. The team survived because their cover held, not because the switch had kept perfect time. In the after-action note, the cell did not blame the device. It wrote that timing by chemistry required margin. It wrote that margins were harder under curfew. It wrote that the device was still preferable to a clock because silence still mattered. These were small documents, not medals, not speeches, and just notes in files that would later be boxed and forgotten. By 1944, sabotage in France expanded with the approach of invasion. Rail targets multiplied. Resistance groups needed simple tools they could use under pressure. The chemical delay switches remained in circulation. They were produced in large numbers. They were packed into tins and dropped in canisters. They were taught in short courses that fit in days because time for training was always scarce. The switch did not win the war. It did not need to. Its role was narrower. It extended the reach of sabotage. It allowed a charge to be planted and the planter to vanish. It forced the enemy to guard not only against men, but against time itself. After the war, technical histories described it in plain terms: a tube, a spring, a wire, a vial, no moving parts until the final strike. And its simplicity was its strength, and also its limitation. Surviving instruction sheets still warned about temperature. They still advised using 2 on critical targets. They still refused to promise precision. Those cautions are part of the story. They show a wartime engineering culture that accepted imperfection if it could be standardized, issued, and used by people under fear. In sabotage files, the device appears as a line item. Delay switches issued, delay switches expended, occasionally delay switches recovered by the enemy. The drama is never written into the paperwork. Only the effect is recorded, if it can be measured at all. For the railway workers and fitters who handled it, the switch was never a symbol. It was a means to interrupt a system that fed occupation. Many returned to ordinary work after liberation, and carrying knowledge that rarely reached official narratives. For SOEs, engineers and instructors, the device remained a reminder of compromise. A clockwork timer would have felt clean. Chemistry drifted. Chemistry depended on weather. But chemistry could be made small and silence kept people alive. In the end, that is why it existed. Because SOE needed distance, because deniability required delay. Because occupied rail yards, factories and depots could only be struck by hands that could disappear. If the viewer wants more evidence-based World War II stories about overlooked tools and procedures, follow the channel.